Now, probably this is no real surprise to you, but I am an unabashed Emily Dickinson apologist. Emily Dickinson gifted us poems about death, poems about life, poems about religiosity, poems about anti religiosity, poems about love, poems about hate, poems about um, comfortable feelings, and poems about the piss and vinegar. For Emily Dickinson did love us so much that she even gifted us, bequeathed upon us, poems that make it easy to talk about what it is that poems do. That is what we have in today's poem. Now, welcome to Trip Cover Lit. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here to discuss poetry. This is a video which will appear in two separate playlists on the channel. Number one being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist of videos dedicated exclusively to the most exquisite poet of all time, but also this will appear in the poetry discussion playlist here on the channel. This poem is known as "'Twas Such a Little, Little Boat," and it reads as such. "'Twas such a little, little boat that toddled down the bay. 'Twas such a gallant, gallant sea that beckoned it away. 'Twas such a greedy, greedy wave that licked it from the coast, nor ever guessed the stately sails. My little craft was lost." Now, why do I think that this poem is so good to talk about? To talk about poetry itself. Well, looking at these 8 lines, you would be excused for thinking this is very boring. Oh, there was a little boat, got swept out to sea, and now our speaker doesn't have the boat anymore. But if we assume that no, this is not actually about a little boat, what it's about is something deeper that has been encoded by Emily Dickinson to seem as if it is about a boat, then we have to do the work to decode it. And I think that it's possible to do a lot of work to decode this in many ways. But here's the thing: I don't know that this poem grants us any type of purchase onto what that second layer of the poem might be about. So you got to put in the work yourself, right? So what are we talking about here? When we're looking at this poem, I think that it is maybe important to start with the fee-fees a little bit. What do these lines feel like rather than what they say? "'Twas such a little, little boat that toddled down the bay." 'Twas such a little, little boat. That sounds quaint. So if this is a metaphor, this boat, a metaphor for something, the something in question is quaint. That toddled down the bay. This sounds toddled is not, it's not jetting, it's not zipping, it's toddling. It is toddling down the bay, not out in the open sea. It is slowly going down the bay. This sounds almost innocent, right? It's a boat, so it wasn't made at sea, it was made on land for the sea. The bay is the land where the land meets the sea. So this is that boat going slowly and cautiously, not too far from home. So we have a quaint thing going not too far from home. "'Twas such a gallant, gallant sea that beckoned it away." Gallant, a word that means daring, basically. So this boat that was made for the sea is maybe afraid to leave home, very quaint little boat, very unassuming boat, is afraid to leave home, the land, for what it is made, the sea, naturally drawn to the sea. But there is that daring sea, and that daring sea did beckon it away. This sounds almost like you're describing someone who has found a partner. 'Twas such a quaint little friend of mine who was afraid to leave home. And then this very daring individual beckoned my friend away. I'm going to assign gender just to have room to talk about this. But if we're talking about the world in which Emily Dickinson grew up, there were pretty well defined masculine and feminine roles. To be quaint, to be afraid to leave home, would have been much more a feminine quality. To be daring and gallant and to beckon would have been more masculine. It would have been a gender role for a man to come to a woman to take her into his life, rather than the other way around. 'Twas such a greedy, greedy wave that licked it from the coast. If we are allowing ourselves that interpretation of someone finding a relationship, this makes it sound like the relationship itself is turbulent. 'Twas such a greedy, greedy wave that licked it from the coast. This, if we're allowing such an interpretation, this has overt sexual overtones, does it not? Nor ever guessed the state. So, okay. 'Twas such a greedy, greedy wave that licked it from the coast. If we were allowing the sort of interpretation that I've gone with thus far, that one would be, perhaps we could say, a young woman being beckoned by her desire for a man. And that man was gallant, was daring, but maybe was not the best guy. It was passionate. The relationship was hot, but that's not always safe. That's not always the safest. Nor ever guessed the stately sails my little craft was lost. Before this couplet, I think the interpretation with which we're going is a little loosey-goosey, but understandable. I think that would be a very utilitarian interpretation of this poem. Fairly straightforward, but something to talk about with this poem. And then we get to this couplet. Nor ever guessed the stately sails my little craft was lost. This makes this poem hit home. This is a moment where this poem becomes ultra real. How many of us have had a friend and lost that friend into a bad relationship? Maybe that friend is no longer allowed to talk to you. Maybe that friend feels that they have lost so many parts of themselves that their past no longer applies to them. This last couplet, assuming that loss for our speaker, becomes very, very sad. And not just for the little boat, but for the speaker as well. This poem, in my opinion, is so obfuscated that it becomes a perfect type of poem to sort of address what it is that poetry does. Poetry takes the world around us and encodes it in this way to some type of approachable language, some type of approachable subject matter. that can be digested by our consciousness, that can be digested by us as readers, that can be consumed in this way in order to promote the talk about this stuff. Have you ever felt comfortable talking about, even thinking about a friend that you can't talk to anymore because they got into a bad relationship? Let alone made a situation such as that so artistic. As Emily Dickinson, no, now obviously, maybe that's not what this poem is about, right? But I think that it opens the door to have these discussions. I think that it opens the door for, I think oftentimes we don't even think about the painful stuff to think about in life. We will fret over it. We will have anxiety because of it. But we do not put it in such words as to make it digestible. This poem, even if it's not about that, to be able to speak about those situations through this poem makes those situations easier with which to contend. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, there's literature on the channel every Monday, or there's poetry on the channel every Monday. There's literature on the channel all the time. Currently going through all of Ernest Hemingway's short stories. Just finished up Dubliners by James Joyce, going through Carrie by Stephen King, all sorts of stuff. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.